everyone. Welcome to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. We're happy you're here. On the podcast, we're certain that you'll relate to the caregiver stories and find comfort with your honorary sisters. Now, before we start, I want to remind you to go to our website, confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com, and sign up for our newsletter. It's full of useful information that you can immediately use. Now, let's learn more about today's guest. Thinking about talking, Jay?
I am, but I have a special request today.
What is that? Oh, do you want me to sing?
I actually
carry on my wayward son. What?
That actually was my request because you've been at conferences all week and I've not been able to talk with you early in the morning.
Me.
Well, I did miss me, but I missed the morning song. So give us just a real fast morning song.
Good morning. It's great to see you, JJ. Good morning to you.
I really, at some point in time, I feel like we should have some of those little birds like chirping on your shoulders.
Oh, I'm almost like Snow White, but not so white.
You got a tan.
Hey, you know what? It's not about my singing. This is not The Voice, although I could be on the show and would not qualify.
Yeah.
But we have an awesome guest today.
Yes.
We have an awesome guest. And I think it's time for you to introduce everyone to Theresa.
It is time for me to get busy, Natalie. So let's stop playing.
Thanks
for the introduction, Natalie. Okay.
Everybody dance now. Okay,
very serious, Theresa. I'm so thankful that we have Theresa Wilbanks with us because if you need to relate, this is the day. Just turn up the music loud, turn up the radio loud, whatever you're listening to. Her story and her message about the caregiver river resonates with all of us. It is not always in a canoe. That's what I think about when I think about the river because, it's a canoe, but I'm telling you that it is wild rapids with her. And I love the story. The ride with her dad is not one to be missed. Theresa is an author, she's a speaker, she's a podcast host, and she's the founder of Sustainable Caregiving. There are so many experiences that we can all relate to and learn from. How she handled taking away the keys from her dad, one of my favorites, the battle on Blueberry Hill, and the moment she recognized the more her father resisted, the more she insisted. Everything that I know about you so far, I love, and I cannot wait for you to share it with our listeners, Theresa. So let's get started, Natalie.
Let's do it. Yay! Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you. So happy to be here with you both.
Yay!
So, do it, Natalie.
So we always like to start the show with, tell us about your caregiving journey. Let's start from the beginning. You were born and then skip to the good part. No, wait. Tell us some background about the family. Tell us a little bit of background because you got to set the foundation. And then let's...
Yes.
Okay.
No, that sounds good. The foundation is that I came from a family of caregivers. So I watched my folks care for my dad's mom and my mom's mom before that. Actually, my mom's mom moved in with us. And then my dad's mom moved in with my folks. I had already left, the house. But so I watched caregiving up close and personal and yet had no idea what I was in for. And even though I saw them helping out, I didn't realize the intensity of it all, especially when I was living away from the house. And then when I get into it, I'm like, did the caregiver gene skip me? Because this is definitely harder than what I imagined. So yeah, and that was, everything was great growing up, great relationship. And then I'll just focus on dad, caring for dad, but he was in his 90s and my husband and I were living in France and I would talk to him every day and he seemed to be doing fine. He was, driving, he was doing well. He was volunteering at the hospital and working out at the wellness center and going on trips. He came to visit us twice. And so while he was in his 90s, I feel like he was a very young 90.
Wow.
I like that. Young 90.
He was impressive. And I would talk to him every day. And, I did get involved. I didn't realize I was actually advocating for him even before we moved back home. Somebody got involved with helping him with his health insurance. And I had to reach out to them and let them know that this was not, something for them to get involved with.
Go into that a little bit. Yeah, because I don't want you to gloss over that one because that's an interesting one. It kind of, it leans into, because I know a little about this part. It almost leans into those helpful individuals that sometimes open up a opportunity for abuse, and abuse not being physical abuse, but abuse being like fraud or whatever. So go tell a little bit more about that. What'd you say?
Well, I was concerned about that because the person who actually had his computer, his passwords, was a friend of dad's friend. So I didn't know this person well. And when dad told me that this friend was helping him get a better price on his health insurance, I freaked out a little bit because Dad had really good health insurance. He retired as a teacher with the state. And so he had a supplement that he wouldn't be able to get if he went out on his own. He wouldn't be able to get that level of coverage that easily. And so I was very concerned. But then also, as you said, I was concerned, what else is going on? How does this person have, his password? So I reached out to my friend, and I was actually in the Czech Republic at the time. I was in Liberec in a hotel lobby and, trying to get a signal and on the phone. And I let her know that, this person needed to be not get into Dad's, we changed the password, not get into Dad's business. And then if she wasn't comfortable sharing this with her friend, I would like to speak with him. And that put an end to it. So he stepped away. But I still to this day don't know what his intentions were, if they were really trying to help Dad lower his insurance costs or whether he had, other things in mind. But that was a wake up call. And Dad did have his identity stolen twice, unrelated, later after we moved back, which, so when we moved back, I felt like the timing was right because he had his identity stolen twice. He had a stroke. So everything seemed to happen, as it should have, because like I said, he was doing fine. But then there was a fire. He lit candles in the evening and he had this whole tray full of candles he would light. Well, he fell asleep and the candles burnt through the tray into the dresser. He woke up to a condo full of smoke and he had the wherewithal to go into the bathroom, soak a towel and throw it over the candles. And when he told me this, he's downplaying it. Like it's not a big deal. Little by little, more and more came out. It was a big deal. The insurance company the fire department recommended to the insurance company that he not stay in the condo because of the smoke. When I saw, then he told me how much the check was to repair everything, I realized there's a lot more than just, a small fire that little fire that he put out. And his feet were cut from all the glass. Wow. Because the candle holder broke. So all this is coming out. And I'm like, Joe, I think we might need to be closer than an ocean away. And, some of us have siblings who they're a little less involved. My brother was an hour and a half away, but he couldn't get over there to check out the situation and let me know what was going on. So I just felt like it was time. And I love my brother. He helped in the ways that he could, but I needed to be there.
Wait,
so we moved back.
I have a question. How many siblings do you have?
One sibling, younger brother.
Okay, 3 years younger brother. You're the oldest because birth order. We love to know birth order. And so, and you had been cruising around. Yes, JJ, you're the oldest.
Yeah, I want to know because and you're about to say this is so. In the midst of all of this, you're like, Dad's 90 and he's doing this, and I feel like we should cross back to the ocean. I just want to make note of this. Theresa has a life. Like she's like also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Does Theresa have a life?
She's living in Europe. So how
it sounded
old were
super
you?
bouge when she said it.
She's
when
very
she was
young.
I was at the Czech Republic and I was looking for a signal.
Yeah,
let me flip my hair a little bit for those of you who can't see. Sorry.
She has a life. So obviously, she's only 20 now. So how old were you at that time?
Yep. Good question, Jay. Because you're right. I thought, wow, she's caregiving at such a young age.
So. Yeah. Are you in a career? Are you just traveling or what's going on with you at that time? Because you're married, I think, or.
Yeah, married late, I'd say late 40s. I turned 50 back in the States when we were caregiving. So late 40s. And my husband, he was an engineer and we had the opportunity to move over there and we were on an open-ended contract. We lived in the Loire Valley for 3 years and Normandy for 4 years. So 7 years we had been there. And the fact that it was open-ended was such a gift because, we could stay as long as we wanted. Mm-hmm. We had a camper van with a top that, popped up and we traveled all over Europe in that van.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a dream. It really was. And I wouldn't say that I worked, but I worked. We hosted 50 guests who came over to visit, during that time. And I taught English to the kids in the neighborhood. We lived in a small town in the Loire Valley. So, what was it? 6,000 people in that town. I taught the commerçants English. So it was just so much fun and it was amazing. So yeah, it was coming home was a bittersweet. We knew we weren't going to stay there forever. We knew at some point we'd have to come home. And it was the right time. As I said, all the signals were there, especially after we got back.
Like knowing what you know now, would you say that you were a long-term caregiver? Because I know that you had referenced like dipping your toe into the caregiving water. Because I mean, like it looks like you're about to say no, but I'm like, you're doing things that sound like caregiver. It's not like it's maybe an hour or two a week, maybe that you're providing some level of support or would you say, no, I'm still a daughter at that point.
Yeah, I feel like I was still a daughter. I definitely was a caregiver. I will say now, I want folks to recognize, it's really important to recognize when we start helping out, even if it's a country away, that we are caregivers. So absolutely, I was a caregiver. I did not realize that until, 3 years into the intense experience when, I was directly there with Dad. But looking back, hindsight, absolutely. I talked to him every other day. We'd have sometimes 2-hour long conversations depending on what was going on. And he seemed fine, but I was definitely helping him with things, and and aware of his situation. So yeah, but when I think of a long-term caregiver, oh my gosh, as you know, there's so many out there who have been doing it for, decades. And that's what I tend to think of as a long-term caregiver.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
This was for me, it was a period in time. Yeah.
And it sounded like there was a crisis. We always say that there's something that happens. It's like this buildup. And for some people, it's like a slow burn. They know that they're going to be doing it. But it sounds like that crisis was the fire.
I would say that was the initial kind of wake up call, but the crisis was actually the stroke. So when we came back, the point, just because to your point, like I was helping out, it felt good. This is all going so well. And then Dad has a stroke. And I can say now that was the tipping point where it turned into, it was so intense so quickly. And but I will say I was wading into it and didn't see it coming at all. And the intensity was building. I just didn't realize it because after the stroke, he recovered 100%, but he could no longer drive. And that was traumatic for both of us. And I was in denial. He was in denial. I had not done any preparation, and I'm not looking back and, shooting myself, but it is a lesson for other folks. Like if I had been able to prepare and look at the alternative transportation options and help Dad get used to them before they were absolutely necessary, it wouldn't have been the same situation where I was taking him everywhere, responsible for his social. I mean, he was involved in so much and he might not have been so resistant. He was able to use the local services. There were some really awesome services where he could call demand on response. I can't remember, it was DART, like a taxi service, but for folks. And so he could call a day ahead and get a ride. He didn't love that though. He did not want to give up the keys. And this was one of the biggest battles of our time while I was caregiving. And I can just remember being in so much distress because we couldn't sell his car because the caregivers used it. They needed to use a car that we had. So they would use his car. His driver's license was no longer valid because he didn't pass the eye exam. And that was, I would say, a result of the stroke in some way, because before that, he was passing the eye exams. This is something for folks to know. Like, it may be that you're like our primary care physician and the eye doctors, they really didn't want to get involved. I read later, this is because, they look at it as a family matter. I saw he had a couple eye doctors. He had macular degeneration and glaucoma. So we had, a retinal doctor. I could see the pain on that doctor's face. Like, he didn't want to be the person responsible for taking away Dad's independence and ability to drive it. So they were not supporting me. And it was finally a tech at one of Dad's eye doctors who I let her know I needed help because he was not. And she said under no circumstances was his vision, at the point where he could drive. I was beyond limit. That doctor did not want to get involved in this conversation either. So she really helped because she was the only person other than me who was telling Dad, this is not okay. So Dad said he knew he didn't have a driver's license, but felt he was above the law and he could drive anyway. We went and got his ID, just because it was around his birthday. And I thought this is a really good time. He's not going to do it if he realizes what's happening, that this means he no longer has a license. And he hid keys everywhere. And, one time I got in his car to move it and this big band music was blaring at like eardrum piercing levels. And I went back in the condo. I'm like, Dad, you've been driving. And he's like, who told you?
Who told you?
So he didn't deny it. And he was convinced somebody had told me. So I'm like, Dad, where are the keys? What? And he said, oh, I remembered I had hidden one under the car, like in one of those magnetic boxes. So he remembered it. So when we would leave, he would sneak out in his car. Now, is that not like some weird flashback to what's like upside down world? Like, he was sneaking out when he knew we'd be gone for a period of time. So that was pretty traumatic.
Oh, so Jay, hold on. This is so great because when we come back, we're going to jump even more into this, but we're going to take a break.
We're going to talk about sneaky dad.
Right back. Sneaky dad, right? We'll be right back. I don't know about you, but my inbox is always cluttered with useless emails. But there's one I always open, the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver newsletter. You may say, Natalie, what makes yours so special? Well, I'm biased, but don't just take my word for it. Here's what our subscribers say they love. First, it comes once per month, and you can read it in under 5 minutes. Next, you'll find amazing tips and resources to use in your everyday life. And who doesn't love a recommendation? These sisters do, which is why we share sister-approved products and discount links to save you time and money. And of course, you're first to know about the upcoming month's confessions. Just like our show, you're guaranteed to relate, be inspired, leave with helpful tips and resources, and of course, laugh. Go to our website, confessionsofthereluctantcaregiver.com, to sign up for our newsletter today.
Hey, everybody. We are back here with Theresa Wilbanks. We're jumping back in. We're talking about what I've referred to as Sneaky Dad, who had car keys. He was not willing to quite give those up. And he was out and about. Theresa found out about the drive because of big band music.
It almost feels like he's 16.
Yeah.
Like he's 16 and he's jamming. I'm surprised he didn't bust these speakers with. I mean, I will tell you, I did bust my speakers. That's why I can't hardly hear since I was 40. My dad was right. Like, you'll go deaf if you listen to your radio that loud. And I'm like, no, won't. And so I'm glad to know that at some point in my life, hopefully, I'll probably be sneaking out as well. So your dad's sneaking out. And so then what? So then what happens? Because you mentioned that you had caregivers. So, okay, so back up just a step.
Yep.
Did you all have paid individuals while you were out of the country? Like, as your dad's aging, did you all pay for anyone, or was it just individuals who might help your dad out and they would drive his car?
That's it. We had a care agency. So when, I came back, was helping out. All of a sudden I realized this is too much. I can't do it all myself and I'm going to need some help. And Dad refused. And that's not uncommon. Mm-hmm. So Dad, I don't need help was his response. And eventually I was able, we all have limits. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn about boundaries, the hard way. I hadn't really thought about them too much until now. And I was really at a limit. And so I let Dad know that you may not need help, but I need help helping you. He was willing to let me do everything all the time. And, even though I told him it was too much, having somebody come into the house, he couldn't imagine it. So he agreed to that when I said, I need help helping you. But when they came in, he was such a sweet, gentle person. He was uncharacteristically nasty. He would say, I don't know why you're here. I don't need help. You may as well go home. And they'd come and tell me this. And so, I'm there in the beginning to just see how things are going. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And so we eventually, and I also learned that, it was better if I shared with them because they were helping him in terms of, they were doing light housekeeping. So they were there as companion services and just things that take some of the burden off of me. And, so I let them know what they could do to help. And I said, even if Dad says no, please take care of these things. And the ones who really understood, Dad's resistance, they knew just to go in there and do it. Mm-hmm. And then they were friendly with him. And I learned that finding somebody who shares his interests was the key. And once we found folks who they showed an interest in him. He loved to talk. He loved to talk about his time in the war and time teaching. He painted landscapes, painting a day. And so we actually found a few folks who painted, who were interested in the things he was doing and had done. And one young girl, she became an RN while she was with us. She would take him to where he could go to the cage and swing, the golf club and hit balls, and taught her how to, golf. So once we found the right match, I call it match.com, like for the three of us. Oh my gosh, he couldn't wait till they would come next. He'd be like, when is Lisa coming back? When is Amy coming back? And I'm like, and it really felt like he preferred them to me, which was fine. But I was a little hurt.
The pendulum swung. The pendulum swung. Like, what do you mean you don't need me? Where are these other ladies?
I know.
You're chopped liver.
We'll just wait till Amy gets here and she can do this, or she can and I'm like, okay, all right, this is great.
That's funny.
So it was that was also a process, and it took some time to get there. And all those battles, they wear you down, and that's where, the conflict. And I had to really look at, where is my ego in this? Where is my, like you said, resistance? I'm resisting his desire for independence in all these cases that we talked about. He just wants his dignity. He just wants his independence. Like when he wanted to jump out of a plane for his 94th birthday. And all I could do every time he said it was hold my breath and, just walk away. I would deflect the conversation, but he just was insisting on this. And I felt like it was definitely triggering me. I felt like he enjoyed that part of it. And that was bothering me. I didn't think he was serious. And then one day he brought it up with his primary care physician, who was actually mine as well. And Dr. G said, well, why not? And I'll tell you, that was a moment of release where I was like, okay, I've been resisting all this time. Maybe I'm the one that, I need to check myself. I'm like, why not? And that was definitely a turning point for me. And I realized that, the conflicts, I had to reassess this, but but the task at hand was to get Dad to a place where he could jump out of a plane for his 94th birthday. And all I could see was him like breaking a leg, hospitalization. Like, this is just, and again, I'm focused on me. What is this going to do to my life? And we set everything up. And he got there and the instructor, or not the instructor, but the person who was going to, bring him down, said, oh, I can land him on his feet. I landed a 90-year-old on their feet last week. And I'm like, no, if they slide in, it's a lot less, dangerous, in my opinion, where he's not trying to land on his feet. But I'm like, okay, if it couldn't get any worse. And we're watching folks go up and come down. And my brother was there. And let me just say, this is an example of how siblings can support. I wasn't going to jump out of that plane. My brother was there to do this with him and my niece, my brother's daughter. So they were going to go up and jump out. They were all signed up, registered, ready to go. Oh, my dad's friend, Bud, who was at 85 at the time, joined as well.
I'm just in awe here. I just want to say, right here in the middle of this story, my mouth is open. Theresa, I just am in shock that you're letting your dad do. Can you imagine me letting mom do this?
Oh, did you? I like how, now here's the thing, Theresa, did you just hear how JJ said, letting your dad, letting mom? I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think we're letting anybody do anything at this point. This is an independence test. Like, I'm going to show you that I am your dad and you will not tell me what to do, young lady.
I'm not there.
Like, doesn't that feel that way?
I'm not there, Theresa.
Oh, it was, yeah. It was. And the family was like, you're letting him do what? That's what I got. Now, when we shared this was happening, and I'm like, oh no, look, I've been there. And I'm on team dad now. And Bud was whispering in my ear the whole way, this is a bad idea. It's a bad idea. So even his friend who's there for support is in my ear saying, don't let him do this. And the funny thing is that morning, dad tried to back out. So he was an hour from the place where we would jump in Zephyr Hill. So he's trying to back out. And I'm like, oh no, dad, we're doing this. And that was because I also was angry. Like, I had been put through, and I'm still feeling a little bit of that. Like, this has been an ordeal for me. We are finally to this point and you're not going to back out. And I'm like, this is my little bit of control that I can still have. And if he got there and he didn't want to jump, of course he wouldn't jump, but we're going. It's all set up. I went to all this trouble and trauma and tears, and we're going. So, we get there, and right before he was about to go up, a group of instructors came down. The winds had gotten up. They said it's not safe for anyone to go up. Dad was given an option to stick it out. Let's see what happens. The winds might die down, get a refund or reschedule. And he took the refund. And that was it. And I said, Dad, if you get a refund, like, this is it. we cannot talk about this like ever again. This is, and in his mind, he was there, he was ready to jump, and the winds got up and he couldn't. And that's his story. And he doesn't, that's perfect. It's perfect because he would have.
He won.
I just think about, as I think about, people talk about falls risk. and like, every health insurance plan is like, no. Don't do that. I love that. I wonder though, you got to love a little God intervention. God's like, don't worry, Theresa, I got you. There's the wind. You can't do it.
I feel like that was my mom up there.
Oh, that's even better. She's all like, could you send some wind, please? He's not thinking.
Yeah.
So
it really worked out.
So you get past your dad wanting to jump out of a plane.
At 94.
Do you think it was at 94? Do you think it was a control thing? Like, he really wanted to do it, or it was just a rise thing?
That's, he tended to have these ideas, and I do believe he wanted to do it. He really did want to do it. Like, he came to France that, the time a year before, I guess, we moved back. He really wanted to, but he, at the last minute, refused to get on the plane. Now, he did. Had to be talked into it. I do believe these are things that he wants to do, but then there's some fear that kicks in, and so maybe reason,
common sense, reason,
common sense, yeah. But he, I do believe he just had this desire, and when I realized what was happening in those conflicts, I called it when winning was losing. So I might win the battle, but really would lose our relationship. Lose things that are really important. He's losing his independence. So whenever I could, I would help him going forward with those things, and that he really wanted to do, and look at them very differently and have different conversations, and, and try to understand them better. Now, I will say, you talked about fall risk. I did walk in, he was on a 6-foot ladder trying to Velcro a painting to the ceiling. And that's because we had already covered all the walls with his paintings. He was doing them so, rapidly, because he was in his surrealist phase. I say he really couldn't see detail, and he loved to paint landscape. So it was one a day, and we couldn't give him away quick enough. And so we decided, well, the walls are covered, we'll just cover the ceiling. And I walked in, and he's up there. He'd already put the Velcro on the ceiling. How? I don't know. He told me every day he didn't feel steady when he walked. And so, in this case, I will say I did hide all the ladders after that. Like, this was a situation where, okay, this can't happen. And trying to reason with him and explain that this wasn't safe behavior, it wasn't going to work. And So, it wasn't that I always said, whatever you want to do, you go ahead and do it. There were limits.
But what I hear you say is, so your dad, I think a lot of times people think caregiving is people is ill, right? And we're talking about just longevity. That's, in Europe, you hear the word longevity as opposed to aging because there's so much stigma around the word aging. You think frail, you think feeble-minded, you think there's some dastardly illness. And your dad is, I feel, when you said jump out of the airplane, I thought of George H. Bush, Dad Bush, right? Where he jumped out of the plane at night. I think he was 98 when he jumped out of the plane. And I don't know that George W.
Dad's mind.
Yeah. And so your dad is just aging and he's had things that happen. The impairments as he's getting older is really just like traditional things that come along with aging. Yes, he had a stroke, but he recovered. But he's got eye issues. He's losing sight and his probably some judgment space. And honestly, if we didn't have backup cameras, I could fall into that and JJ might have to push me around. Yeah. But I'm all like, let's just hit reverse. I get the old people who put it in reverse and they just back out and hope it turns out well. That's me. It doesn't sound like it's an illness related. And I think that's so important. This is the first time, Jay, I think we've talked about it on this show about just aging, your parents just aging. Go ahead.
This helps me understand something. I think folks who've not been in the caregiving situation, a lot of times when they're asking me about it, they want to know what the illness was. They want to know what and I think you've hit on it. This is why, because folks don't understand what that aging process can look like. Because Dad did take, he took blood thinner. First, it was warfarin, caused a bleed. Then he was on Coumadin. Now imagine what we went through with all of that. This is, as you said, normal aging. Then his medication management, he didn't want me to hand him his pills. He didn't want me to sort his pills. Like all of this was just too much. He couldn't even imagine that he couldn't do it. He couldn't imagine that I would think he couldn't do it. I couldn't imagine what was happening when he was trying to sort them and what I was seeing. They were, all in the wrong containers. So we couldn't let it go, but I could figure out ways to help him maintain his independence as we transition to, having a company do it. So I'm not doing it. This organization's sorting the pills. We're getting them pre-packed, but he didn't even want me to bring them to him. He'd forget to take them. We set up timers. So we went through all these iterations to help him stay as independent as possible. Eventually it just came down to I had to give them to him, but I would set him, actually my husband would, it was triggering for him, for me to do it. Set him in the cup in front of his, where his coffee table, and then walk away and then kind of watch around the corner to make sure he took them. Because if I were walking out there and setting his medications down, he was angry about that. Like, it was triggering because he's seeing how this is something he can't do. These are all the losses that we experience, that he experiences aging. And so Natalie, you bring up such a good point, because I don't think we understand. I certainly did not understand that it's just the aging process itself creates this tremendous, intense caregiving experience. Oh, man. And yeah.
I'm going to, because boom, I'm right on the second break. We're going to take a second break and we'll be right back. This is so good. I mean, now that we've diverted jumping out of a plane, but now we're on meds. Now it's the baby battles. So anyway, we'll be right back. Do you love to listen to podcasts? So do we. And these sisters are excited to support our fellow sister in care, Nicole Will, host of Navigating the World with Your Aging Loved One. As former guests ourselves, we love how Nicole explores the world of aging and care. Beyond the informative interviews, Nicole's gathered helpful resources and practical tools that encourage and give hope to caregivers navigating the aging journey with their loved ones for a more meaningful and fulfilled life. You can find Nicole wherever you download your favorite podcast or go to her website, www.willgather.com.
Hey, everybody, we are back with Theresa Wilbanks. We're talking about baby battles, and we're talking about meds. But, Theresa, it sounds to me like there's so much. You talk about triggering your dad. There's so much of these things that it's about independence. What seems to trigger him is anything that you do that takes away a portion of his independence. Your whole theme of everything you do, you call it the caregiver river. I look at what you do. I mean, that is an analogy. Like, that is... You're up, down, you're up, down, you're up, down. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. The way I was able to look at it after, a few years into it was seeing that opportunity. And then we'll start from just on the horizon. It's a water reference, but on the horizon, you see this caregiving opportunity coming, or you don't. But if you're caring for someone, you might see it, your next caregiving opportunity on the horizon, like for my in-laws, for example, down the road. And then, I feel like I started wading into it. So I'm helping out here and there, but I didn't give up too much of my own interests and, life. I was still able to travel. Joe and I were able to travel and go skiing and do this and that. Mm-hmm. We were helping out and then, set up supports as Dad needed them. But then there's the drowning phase. So, just feeling like completely out of control, overwhelmed, burned out. Don't know what help I need, much less where to find it. And then navigating. And I'll get back to the river and how it really applies. But just the whole water, that navigating is like, we've been doing it for a few years. We've kind of figured out, what the challenges are. There's still going to be another crisis, but we're going to be able to manage it, and not everybody gets there in their caregiving experience. Some stay completely overwhelmed and drowning. I almost did. And then, of course, the partying and drifting, which can be 2 years later, and we're still not able to reconnect with ourselves and the things that we were passionate about before caregiving. But the river analogy was because I just saw it as I was in this river with the rapids, coming, they're up ahead and not being prepared. What's around the next corner? What's around the next bend? Is it a waterfall? The obstacles in the river, the logs and the rocks, and all of it. And then when I realized, the navigating piece, like it doesn't mean the river has changed. It just means that we're using strategies and skills that we've developed along the way. And so we're able to go with the flow more. We're able to resist less, and there's less conflict. The triggers don't, because Dad was triggered, I was triggered. I was triggered, I would react. And I felt like I was dropped back into the nest. I was like a teenager in Dad's home. And we were having these battles and conflicts because we had such a great relationship. What is happening here? Mm. And once I was able to cultivate mindfulness, and it wasn't easy, I would go out on runs to de-stress and come back more stressed because I was just, circular conversations were going over and over in my head, the arguments that Dad said that me saying you shouldn't drive is negative thinking. Like it was just like, so coming back more stressed. It wasn't until I was able to put a boundary around the worry. And not, while I'm on my run, I'm not going to think about it. So that's where boundaries came in. I'm going to have a mindful run and I'm going to enjoy the trees along the way. I'm going to tune into the trees, that type of thing. That's when the strategy started helping. Even venting didn't help until I found the right folks to vent to, till I understood. The blueberry battle is an example.
Tell us about the blueberry
I'm
battle.
ready.
Yeah. So
I'm ready.
It's just so minor. This is something that, sharing it, I'm going to share it with you because I can be vulnerable and feel I'm in a safe space. But when I shared this with folks who had not been in the caregiving situation, I felt very judged, had a vulnerability hangover, as Brene Brown says. So Dad had this Dad used blueberries. Joe and I used blueberries. We had different blueberries. And Dad's bag of blueberries was resealable. But, he didn't, that was something that he could not understand. He couldn't see well enough, right? There's all kinds of things. So he would cut the bag open and blueberries all over the freezer. We tried everything to just put them in containers for him, to help so that we're solving this blueberry situation. So he can have his blueberries, but yet it's not like this big mess in the freezer. It was actually freezer. He's pulling them out of the freezer. And I can't even think of all the iterations we went through in trying to help, but and my frustration with Dad, somebody one time asked me, so, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, I'm really frustrated. Well, what's frustrating? And I said something about blueberries and she's like, blueberries? And wow, did I feel judged. I realized telling somebody this who's not been in a caregiving experience, this sounds ridiculous. I can't cope. But the blueberries were the tip of the iceberg. And I was at a limit and the blueberries were the thing. Well, I shared this in a webinar that I was doing for caregivers. So there's 120 caregivers and they were typing in, oh my God, and comments after, I can so relate to the blueberry. See, this was a safe space to share that. And I think learning who we can vent to, we want to make sure that it's helping us so that after I'm venting, I feel good that I'm not repeatedly sharing the same things because I'm just stuck in it, right? I'm not releasing it. It's still right here. So understanding how we can vent in a way that's helpful. Maybe it's to a therapist, maybe it's to another caregiver friend, but yeah, that's the blueberries. And the blueberry thing helped me definitely learn that I was burned out. That was I wouldn't have gotten upset about blueberries, and this upset had I not been burned out. And really, is that something I want to spend my time and energy and frustration on?
I think that's probably the bigger thing. Is this really what I'm willing to do? At this moment, I'm doing it with coat hangers with Jason. I'm truly trying to let the coat hangers go. It just makes it easier for me to do laundry. And if he could just put the coat hangers down from the top shelf to the bottom shelf, and then I have to decide, am I going to die on coat hanger hill?
But Theresa, you talk about the part about being vulnerable and sharing it. When you said when you were talking about the blueberries, I have to tell you, and Natalie will say, get the Kleenex. So I've gotten these like tears in my eyes. And the reason is because I think when you say the blueberries and you had the session and people were saying that's me, like I think about my blueberry incident. Like I think about those little things. Like I think about Emily and the banana pudding. We almost died on Banana Pudding Hill. Like everybody has
It was
that.
JJ's fault though.
It was my
Theresa.
fault. But like I think about those moments, mom's phone, like the fight, like these little things. But if I told somebody that, they would be like, you're the worst daughter. Like they have all this judgment. And I think people need to know, both the people that are listening and that are listening to you try and share this and judging, they need to know it's not about that blueberry. It's not about that phone. It's not about the banana pudding. But what you said was, we are burnt out. You need to help us in so much more. There's this word that, they need to say is, how can I help you? Like, what can I, like, hey, what can I do? Like, hey, do you need to go out and walk? Can you go clean my freezer out? Can you go pick up the blueberries?
I'll even say this. I'll even say this. So the clinician in me would say, it's really validation that we're seeking.
Yeah.
It's really, sometimes it's not even help. So sometimes people need help and sometimes you just want to be validated. Yeah. Like, and it's something as simple as, that sounds really hard. Yeah. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And, as a caregiver, and I had to learn a long time ago, Theresa, that I had to say thank you when people told me they were sorry. Because as a good Southerner, but I don't think it's just being a Southerner, people be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And you're like, oh, that's okay. No, it's not. It sucks. And it's really just if somebody says, hey, I'm really sorry that you're having to clean up blueberries every day and they're rolling out and you just stepped on them and then you've, tripped and you've got a fall hazard, or you've got blueberries rolling. I just envision blueberries just flying out of the
on your socks. That's what I'm thinking. Like they're everywhere.
Blueberries and you're walking around with blueberries all over you. Kind of like this, but it's really about like, somebody says, oh man, number one, say, hey, I'm really sorry that's happened to you. That sounds really hard. And as a caregiver, we have to say, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. It could be, that's all I need.
Yeah.
30 seconds of validation.
Yeah. I say there's a validation void. I mean, we really experience it, and either our healthcare professionals don't recognize what we're going through if they've not been a family caregiver.
Yeah.
They aren't really able to help and say the things that we need to hear. So we don't get it anywhere. We don't get that validation anywhere. And then we start to blame ourselves. And JJ, I get it. Like, you're feeling like you start to judge yourself, and showing ourselves compassion. I mean, it's what we have to do, but it's not easy. It's just not easy and forgiveness, when I think about forgiveness, I think about, I had to forgive Dad. I had to forgive my brother, or the people Dad's friends who stepped away when caregiving became intense, but I had to forgive myself a lot, repeatedly, and showing myself compassion. But all of that it's hard to do from a place of burnout, and that constantly, like you say, not receiving that validation. It just keeps you in that place where you're judging yourself and you feel like there's something wrong with you. And we're not, we feel so alone already. Like it's just, it's layers.
That is so true. Jay, I'm going to tell you, I can't even believe this. We're at time for sister questions because we're almost at the end. But don't worry, guys. We've got after the confession coming up. But we got to do sister questions. Oh, Theresa, did I not tell you that we do sister questions? These are questions that we don't care about. We ask whatever we want.
Well, I want to make sure. So here's my question, but I want to take her down the path because I know we got a little bit. So this is my question. So tell me just a little bit about when it got hard and when you got that resolve. Tell me about that portion.
Okay. Wow. There was a moment. So it got hard probably when I realized I was not in a sustainable situation. I really felt like Dad was in his 90s. I'm in my 50s. He might outlive me. His mom lived to be 104. I didn't think I could survive if he would live to be 104. And so it was just the resistance, those conflicts, all the things that we talked about were building up. Even with help coming in, I realized at this point, so it was probably about 2 years in, a year in, maybe. I was connecting other caregivers with resources. I looked back and thought, it didn't have to be this hard. I can help other caregivers by helping them know what resources are out there, the local area agencies on aging, and, what the VA can do. So, all these things I was doing, but I still was struggling. I was struggling with the emotions. And so I'm like, if I can't figure out this piece of it, then I will not be able to truly help caregivers. And I was diving into every emotion, deconstructing the experience, the pain, and figuring out through trial, error, and tears what worked. And I read this article, and in it was a quote by Ryan Holiday. And it was about a Nietzsche quote, actually, but it was a quote by Ryan Holiday, who wrote The Obstacle is the Way. And it was just about Amor Fati and loving your fate. And I thought, I was in a cafe. This is just pre-pandemic. I was writing blog posts and I just sat back and I'm like, well, there's no way I could love this fate. I was still resisting, I was resisting my role, resisting the tether, resisting that in my 50s, this might be my decade and what it looks like. And I thought, well, if I could do that, if I could love my fate and accept and embrace the situation that I'm in, then everything would change. And that's what I did. I dove into how to do that. And was able to embrace the role and recognize this is where I need to be. This is where I should be. And man, that was a process. But when I got there, everything flipped. It flipped the script from I have to be a caregiver to I get to be a caregiver. And how can I grow through this? And I wouldn't have used those words at the time, but what can I learn from this experience? And I knew that if I could figure this out, I could help others. And that was part of the positive that would come from it. Yeah.
I will say, and I'm still talking, Natalie. Ta-da. Watch her. She's like, crap, she's still talking. I will say that what you've learned, I can't tell you how immensely it impacts others. Like when I listen to everything you say, when I look at your blogs, when I look at your posts, I'm like, hey, that's me. And so if you don't follow Theresa or you haven't read her content, the things that she puts out, she's got 12 steps. Like it puts chills on me. Like it's you, like it's your life. If you're caring in any capacity of someone that's just aging or someone that's ill, like it's you, like it's totally relatable. It's all of us. And it touches you because it's so honest and it's so authentic, Theresa. You're just like, here it is. And so you accepting the fate and saying, I'm going to make something out of this, it has impacted. And I want you to know that. So it has a big impact.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and Theresa has created Sustainable Caregiving.
Yeah.
And she actually transitioned to a certified caregiving consultant. And so, but I'm going to ask two questions.
Oh.
Two questions. Because we're going to have more and after the confession, but because we want to deep dive a little bit further. But tell me about what the 12 sustainable caregiving strategies are. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So this is what came from that desire to create a sustainable caregiving experience when I knew that I was not, where I was. I could not continue this for years to come. Mm-hmm. So again, looking at it was through trial, error, and tears, taking all of the emotions, deconstructing the pain and the struggle and figuring out what it would take to get me to a better place. And that's where they came from. And then over time, I was able to see how they kind of grouped into to 3 categories, I guess you could say. And setting, you want me to go through them?
Yeah, I do.
Setting boundaries. Yeah, setting boundaries, cultivating mindfulness, cultivating compassion, primarily self-compassion, and then reimagining self-care and what that looks like as a caregiver. And that's sort of reconnecting. I feel like these can really help us prevent and recover from burnout. And then we've got the accepting and reframing, to gain control, we have to release control. Mm. So accepting the role, like we talked about, accepting help, which we've talked about, accepting outcomes to minimize conflict, jumping out of the plane is an example, and then accepting and transforming obstacles. And then the difficult emotions, just to manage those, I feel like there was, I really needed to release them, process and release. And the ways that I was able to do that were through venting. And again, there's a lot to each of these.
Of course.
Journaling was extremely helpful for me, and then forgiving, and then planning. So planning for the worries. And those are the 12 sustainable caregiving strategies. Are what helped me get to a better place, begin navigating. I do believe we can move from drowning to navigating. And then we're going to be drowning again, and that's okay. We'll just be able to get more quickly back to navigating because we know how. We know how we can, when we feel ourselves sliding into burnout, we understand what's happening, and we can use these strategies to slow that slide into the flames of burnout.
Well, and you know what that is really is that's building resilience. So the way that people build resilience is through moderate stress. It's not through high stress. It's moderate stress. Mm-hmm. And when you learn, Bruce Perry talks about this, we should, that is how you build resilience. You have these experiences that are moderate stress. You identify strategies to help you get through it so that the next time moderate stress comes, it doesn't feel as overwhelming. And that is building true resilience. If you live in this chronic state of just heightened anxiety and everything is so bad, it's actually going to be counterproductive. So it's not that stress is a bad thing, because actually we learn from it and we manage it. It's how we learned as children to manage stress and build resilience. And I'm sorry you get a little mental health thing there, but I will tell you what I hear you telling me is you're teaching people how to build resilience, and so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming. It's like I'm going down this river and I see a rock and I don't have to panic and think I'm going to drown. I'm like, I'll just go around it, because my past experience said, do this and you go around it and you're safe and you're sane. So yeah. I think that's important. Okay. My last question. What is your favorite guilty pleasure? What is the thing that you do just for you that you're like, that this is my go-to? I don't give this to anybody.
Okay. I watch Gordon Ramsay cooking competition. And like, I wouldn't say that I hide that from anyone, but I will say I sneak it into my 15, like if I need to take a 15-minute transition or I'm a little bit, intense about something, I'm like, oh, I'll just go watch 15 minutes of this because in France, I loved cooking. I hated to cook before that. I learned and loved cooking. And so I don't think I started them there, but with Dad, caring for Dad, I would have the only time I could watch the show, I'd have it up while I was preparing a meal for him. So I snuck it in here and there where I could. It was self-care. So to this day, and I say what I say with guilty pleasures for caregivers, just remove the guilt.
Yeah.
And then you got something, so for me, I recognize that, it's not meditating and it's not, maybe journaling, but it's something that I really enjoy. So I do work it in. And I do feel probably a little guilty.
Oh,
it's all right.
It's funny because I do agree. I have my own like guilty pleasures. I'm like, I'm going to do this just for me and I don't really care. So, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to tell you, we're going to wrap it up. Theresa, you're absolutely amazing. Guys, stick around. We're going to do After the Confession. You definitely want to subscribe to After the Confession because this is where we're going to get even more. Until we confess again, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Again, thank you so much for listening. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions podcast. Don't forget to visit our website to sign up for our newsletter. You'll also find the video recording of all of our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. Don't worry, all the details are included in the show notes below. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. You may be surprised to find out, but we are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have any medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC. Thank you for listening to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast.